to automatically record. So you have
Jennifer Wagner, Jen. She's Cornerstone Advisors esteemed client relations director. And Jen actually grew up in Sterling Heights, Michigan, and she graduated from Western Michigan University. So she would probably want me to say, go Broncos. She shared with me that she has really, really missed her annual summer trip to Lake Michigan. Her aunt actually is a longstanding customer of Choice One Bank. So Jen is the first touch point for Michigan banks that would like to work with Cornerstone Advisors, so she can discuss performance improvements, contract negotiations, strategic planning, best practices, all of Cornerstone services. And then she would connect you to Cornerstone's experts in the field. So now with us today, we are very pleased to have Tom Hill as our speaker presenter for It's Time to Stop Fighting Fires and Finally Improve Back Office Processes. Tom focuses on Cornerstone strategy and execution solutions. In his role, he works very closely with clients in process improvement, benchmarking, and loan origination system selections. Tom is an experienced operations leader who is dedicated to the continuous learning, mentoring, and promoting of improvements. Now, prior to joining the Cornerstone team, he spent 13 years at Umpqua Bank in Sterling Bank. Sorry if I missed.
No, it's all good.
Tom has a BS in Industrial and Management Engineering from Montana State University, Bozeman MT. He's a Six Sigma black belt and a lean expert. Thank you both for being here with us. I wanted just a couple administrative comments. Please ask questions as they arise. Go ahead and speak the question, or if you're more comfortable with sending it to my chat, Jen's chat, or to the Q&A for the group, so whichever you prefer. With that, Tom and Jen, welcome, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Jill. Jen, did you want to say anything before I jump in?
No, I'm anxious to hear what you have to say about improving back office processes.
All right, yeah, the topic today is about improving back office processes. Thanks, Jill. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, I'm Tom Hill, and from Cornerstone, a director here. I'm located in the Northwest, so appropriate conversation here about fighting fires. Lots of firefighting going on here in the Northwest, actual firefighting, and we don't want that to stop. But part of the state that I'm in, we were talking about it as we were setting up here, lots of smoke. So anyway, in the back office, we don't want you fighting fires. So that's the topic for today. And as Jill mentioned, you know, we want this to be an interactive discussion. So, you know, use the Q&A or the chat function to ask questions, or just take yourself off mute if we're able to. I don't know if they're able to, and ask questions, because we're a fairly small group. So I want to make sure we're, you know, make this interactive, and this is for you. So again, good afternoon, and hope you had your lunch and settled in, and we'll talk through it. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about efficiency, improving cost, quality, and speed as a part of that. Also talking about ways to break out of the constant firefighting mode that we tend to get stuck in the back office. I worked in banking for many years, applied this approach that I'm going to talk about today, and also was in your shoes as far as, you know, getting caught up in firefighting and trying to figure out how are we going to move forward. So I'm going to share the approach that I did not invent, but that I use. It's based on a lean methodology that I took from manufacturing when I transitioned from manufacturing into banking. But it's all applicable to banking as it is in many industries. So I'm going to talk about that structure, as well as go through a back office case study. So we're going to talk about the what side of this as well as the how. And I'm going to go pretty quick. I'm going to have to acknowledge up front, I'm going to cover a lot of, which is probably pretty deep content in a very short time frame. So again, I'm going to move pretty fast in the beginning and then to save enough time to actually go through the how piece of this. All right. So when it comes to efficiency, if you just define it, it's our ability to produce a desired effect, a product or a service with the minimum amount of effort, expense, or waste, with good quality or great quality, and or it's the fact of being efficient. So that's just the definition there, because you hear a lot of times people talking about, well, we need to be more efficient, but what does that really mean? So we need to break that down. So it's about less effort, less expense, less waste, better quality and speed or faster delivery of our products and services to our customers and our members. So a byproduct of that is also cost. So we want to have lower costs. And I'm going to touch on costs in kind of two ways. The process piece of it that I'm going to talk about, it's more of it's kind of an outcome, right? It's indirect. We're going to improve our efficiency by saving time, and really that we're going to see our cost savings through growth. So it may not be as immediate as if we went after something like contracts, and that's what I want to talk about next. Go ahead, next slide, Joe. So I just want to talk about contracts real brief, because I understand the urgency that banks and credit unions are facing to control costs in today's environment. So at Cornerstone, we do a lot of contract work, and some of the data that we've collected is pretty surprising to me that financial institutions negotiate, with having some knowledge of market pricing, only 75% of the time. So that puts us at a real disadvantage to make sure we're getting the best price. And so the reason why I talk about contracts is because this is a very, I guess, quick way, relatively speaking, to see some savings is to go after our back office contracts, whether that's software contracts or third-party providers. Taking a look at those contracts and improving the pricing is a quick way to get some lift if you haven't really focused on that recently. So the other thing is that we're only getting competitive bids about half the time. So again, not having that knowledge of the market pricing and getting competitive bids, we have some leverage, puts us at a disadvantage. So those two things in attacking contract can be a very quick way to go after the cost side of it. All right, so let's move into the back office piece of this. So Jill, go ahead and go to the next slide. So how do we break out of our firefighting mode and create the back office efficiencies? I'm pretty sure creating a task force is not the best way to do this. So we've probably seen that approach, and go ahead and hit the animation there, Jill. But it's not the best way to go about doing this. Go ahead and hit it again. So the best way to do it is by improving our work. So making the work easier for our people to do. So how do we do that? Let's go to the next slide. So this is one of my favorite quotes. It's actually, there's things that kind of step on your toes. This is probably what I would call a toe smasher. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dr. Deming's teachings or his, if you took any courses in college or business school, where it talked about Deming's thoughts around business. He has a lot to say, especially around our practices that govern, I would say, Western management practices. He wasn't a big fan with a lot of the top-down structure that traditional management approaches. So the thing that he was really railing on, I guess is a good way to put it if you read some of his materials, is that managers are too far away from where things are actually happening to truly understand what's going on. And so he was a proponent of getting people who actually do the work very involved in improvements, and the approach that we're going to talk around this lean methodology in banking, it follows that approach. So how are we making improvements today? Is it managers making changes? Do we have experts or business analysts that are the only ones that make changes? Or do we buy new software and hope that's going to solve everything? I think one of the reasons why the quote here talks about 95% of the changes make, so-called no improvement is because we're not actually measuring whether or not what we're doing, whether that's making process changes or buying new software, we don't actually measure before and after to see if we're making a difference. So we'll go on and go to the next slide. So again, I was touched a little bit on this, how we traditionally manage our back office, and talked about kind of that standard approach that we learned probably in a college operations class if we took that as a part of maybe a business degree. But as you go through this, the graphic on the top there talks about from top management on down to the people who do the work on the front lines every day, our team members. It really, the improvements or changes are kind of reserved to that top level group or the top management. They're the ones who innovate. Everybody else, from kind of the lower middle management to the leads and the supervisors and the team members, they're really just kind of just maintain it, just status quo. When you take a look at this from kind of the lean management viewpoint, you can see there's this slice of daily improvement that's across there that involves everybody from the team members all the way up to the top management. And to me, I think this is really the piece that's typically missing, is getting everybody involved in this process of making improvements. But the difficulty in doing that is, how do you do that effectively so it isn't chaotic? And so that's where this structure I'm going to talk about today comes into play. In order to pull this off, you have to have a good approach to do it. And it's not a suggestion box approach, but it's actually, very much hands-on with the leaders, working with the team members on a daily basis, and doing it in increments so it's manageable. Because we can't spend our full time, just making improvements. We've got to get our work done as well. So kind of pose a couple questions here. So how much has changed in your operating areas over the years, and do you have the same problems you had last year? The answer to that is yes. Then we might want to take a look at a fresh approach. All right, so go ahead and go on to the next one, Jill. The other thing I want to bring up is what is driving the need for change. Oftentimes, change is driven by a crisis, whether that's a cost crunch or what we're experiencing this year. It was amazing to me how COVID has really forced some change to happen, very rapidly, where it probably wouldn't have happened had we not had the crisis. So the ability to work from home, was kind of taken lightly and not really, it's like, well, we're going to approach that slowly, basically. But then we had to do it and figure that out. And, a lot of you probably figured out how to do that in a rapid manner. So you can see how that crisis really drove that change to happen faster than if it hadn't. Similar with our ability to deliver digitally, that really ramped up as a result of this crisis, just out of need. Whereas folks would typically go into a branch, now branches were either closed or maybe they're fearful for that human contact, so they would adopt the digital processes more readily. So without these pandemic crisis, what's going to drive that change? And really it comes down to leadership, right? Leadership's got to drive that change. But when we start to talk about change, what determines good change versus not good change? we need to have a good definition and understanding of that, especially if we want to involve more people in the process. If you don't have some common, methods, tools, language behind it, it's going to be very, very difficult. So, and as we create, the emphasis for change, we need to make sure we're not creating chaos. And the change shouldn't be random. It should be tied to something kind of big picture. All right.
Excuse me, Tom. We did have a question come into my chat. They would like to know what the biggest obstacle that you see in making changes.
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, really, it comes down to, I think, complacency. Is a big one where I think we're doing okay, or maybe 3% improvement is good, but just kind of complacency with, like the graphic says, we've always done it that way. We just keep on doing what we're doing. It's okay. I mean, I think as we go through the next slides, it's going to talk about kind of some perspective on how much opportunity there is. So I think complacency a big one. Also, I would say, just a command and control mentality where you have those, few people making change, and not, change is just going to happen too slow if it's left in the hands of just a few or a few managers. All right, great question. All right, let's move along to the next. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, developing the structure and a culture of continuous improvement. And I'm not sure if anybody has seen this graphic before. It's been around for a while. It's got a name. It's called the iceberg of ignorance. It was developed by this gentleman called Sidney Yoshida a number of years ago. And really, it looks at kind of the bottom of the iceberg, where 100% of the problems are known to the staff, right? Because they see it and feel it every single day, whether you're in the contact center, or you're in a branch on the front lines, or you're in the loan delivery process or deposit operations. When it comes to what the true problems are, they see it uniquely through that lens of having to deal with it on the front lines. And as you kind of go up the layers of management, you become disconnected. And I'll own up to this as well. I was part of that, group where I thought I knew what the solutions were, and I really tried to use software a lot to try to so-called automate things. But because I didn't truly understand what was happening, really understand what's happening on the front lines, really kind of missed the mark. So when Dr. Deming said it was, 95% of improvements made by managers don't make any improvements, you can kind of see, because they only know 4% of the problems. So it kind of lines up. All right. So, is there a structure that defines what making an improvement means, or how improvements are done? And let's talk about that next. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, Joe. So this structured approach to continuous improvement, really it involves, kind of a teaching approach where you're taking this information and working with a small group of people. So it may be a manager leading their team of leads and supervisors through this process. And so this is the approach that I take with clients as well, is really try to work hands-on, make sure the leadership and the staff is engaged, and then transferring the knowledge by doing it hands-on, not PowerPoint like we are today, but actually applying this. Normally I teach this, a lot of these concepts with a simulation that's done hands-on. Hard to do that these days, to be face-to-face with folks and working through this, but yeah, typically I use a simulation to kind of drive home some of these points. Don't have that ability in today's environment. Hopefully we'll get back to that soon. But really that's the best way. I think most people are hands-on learners. So that's really the way this methodology is set up to work. And it's coupled with some, foundations, some principles, as well as tools to provide that sustained success. But really, it becomes over time, you start to broadcast that knowledge out into your workforce. And that's when it really becomes powerful, because everybody's thinking and working to the same and beating to the same drum. All right, let's go on to the next one. So I wanted to touch on, again, some higher level concepts here that really need to be top of mind as you're going through this process of putting in a structure. So it needs to be set up and guided by principles. And so this approach, and I call these the guiding principles of continuous improvement, it really comes down to these 5. So first and foremost, always look at work through the lens of what adds value in the eyes of the customer. Super important. If we start to get too internal, we'll lose focus on what we're really trying to do for the customer. So that's number 1. Second is to view your work how the customer experiences it. And we call that the value stream. So that's all the activities from the beginning of when the customer requests something until we actually provide it for them. And so oftentimes that cuts across our organization, because we tend to kind of put ourselves in these functional, silos, so to speak. But a customer might experience, a touch point at each one of those silos. And if that's not connected, if we don't look at it that way, I think we're really missing an opportunity here, and we'll have a very clunky overall delivery process experience for the customer or the member. Third point is to envision the work flowing and constantly eliminate waste. So this is one of the things that I always think about as a manager in my areas when I was trying to, make things faster, speed it up, better quality. We tend to work out of work queues. It almost becomes just the way it is. But if we really take a look at it from our customer's perspective, that's them just sitting, waiting to get what they need. So whenever I kind of would get lost on what to do next, I would always think about, how do I envision my work flowing? Why is it stopping? How do we make it move? So that's a key piece to it that you can always draw back to. Fourth one is produce at the pull of the customer. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on. It's really about not pushing work, but synchronizing how you do things. Again, that has to do with the speed of delivery, but it also has to do with a lot of waste coming to the process as a result of that. So number 4 is a very hard one to do, and it's also a very foreign concept when it comes to banking, to really synchronize and try to work that way. Producing at the pull of not only the customer, but let's say you might be your downstream person if it's a multi-step process within the back office. All right, so 5th one is to continuously pursue perfection or the ideal delivery. So always keeping that bar raised and trying to strive for perfection. So what does that look like? Let's go on to the next, Jill. So this is what's the ultimate goal of our work? This idea of perfection or the perfect delivery. And this is a pretty high level concept, I realize, but this is how high the bar should be set. So when we hit this mark, then we can be done. But I don't think we'll ever hit there. So an ideal delivery is one that is defect free. And so one of the things I see in banking a lot is really just this lack of understanding or focus on how much impact defects have, whether that's missing information, you name it, things that are just wrong that we have to clean up, how much of a productivity killer, cost, adds costs and slows the process down. So knowing what your defects are and the rate at which they're happening is a key piece, and not very many places really pay much attention to it. Even a 10% defect rate is causing a lot of havoc and costs and time in the process. So that's the first one. Delivering on demand, only when somebody wants something. Can't deliver a whole lot of things to customers without them requesting it, just in the nature of the banking business. But internally, it has to do with that pull concept. So you don't produce something that the next person isn't necessarily ready for. It has that synchronizing effect. Again, that's pretty tough one to achieve, but that's, again, we're talking ideal here. Immediate, so exactly when it's being requested, we deliver it. So you think about how many processes and services that we provide, products and services we provide in banking that are not immediate deliveries. So opening an account, getting a loan. Ideally, we would have our money, in our account ready to work for us, or we'd have the bank's money in our account via a loan immediately, not, an example of a home equity line of credit, not months down the road. So that immediate delivery is our goal. How do we do that? Delivering one at a time is key, not working in batches. A lot of our work in the back office comes in batch reports or things that are, in large bundles. Again, that just starts to add time into our process. So ideally, we would produce and deliver things one at a time. That would be our goal. No waste. And then the last item is really about our people. So, we can't just, break out the club and say, work faster. So there needs to be an acknowledgement that what our people are experiencing, and really that's our responsibility. What sort of tools have we given them, and are we making their job easier to do? Kind of what I kicked this session off with. We really have to make sure that we're involving our team members in the process, and not making it so that they're working 20 hours of overtime a week. So that's a key piece to it, as well as we go through this improvement processes. If you make an improvement and then I'll immediately turn around and have a layoff, I guarantee you, their engagement is going to go to zero, and your attempts at any continuous improvement efforts are going to be null. So these are the components of an ideal delivery that, again, we would kind of look at all of our processes through. This is the lens we want to look through. The quote here that I have talks about true north thinking always concerns what we need to do, not what we can do. So I think that's a pretty wise saying. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about this common knowledge and language when we talk about the structure of continuous improvement. So this is one of the first things I work with teams on, is when you start to take a look at your work, you line out step by step, you really want to take a look at your work and put it into these categories. What are we doing that's value added, again, in the eyes of our customer or our members? And basically, it's value added if it's something the customer is willing to pay for. All right, and then the second category of this is non-value added. So anything that doesn't transform the product or service, somebody's not willing to pay for it, or it's not performed correctly the first time. So you can't do something multiple times and say it's value added. If it's having to be redone, it's non-value added. When you take a look at it from this perspective, non-value added activities in banking, in my experience, over 95% of the step-by-step things that we do in the back office are non-value added. So, well, how do we break out of that, right? And really, we kind of take that non-value added. You can break it down into two types. The first type is activities that can't be reasonably eliminated in the near term. So we might have a major systems gap. We might have a requirement from a regulation that is, I know, overly onerous. We never have any of those, right? So, or an internal control that we need to have in place that, the customer may not be willing to pay for it, but we need it. So those are the type 1, I guess, non-value added things that are pretty difficult to change. I would just caution not to get, lazy on that one, because you want to really try to attack all sorts of non-value added activities and eliminate them if you can. But you got to realize that there's some of these things that we just have to do today. Maybe we don't have, again, we're kind of stuck with the systems we have for now, and we got to deal with them. So the second type, or type 2 non-value added, represents the waste that's prime candidate for quick elimination. And there's tons of this in our processes, especially if we diagnose them and look at them. So that's what we want to go after, is the type 2 that we can quickly eliminate. So that's how when you take a look at a process, we always add up, what are the number of value added steps? What are the number of non-value added steps? And let's try to reduce at least by half the non-value added steps. And maybe we'll only get 15–20%, but that's a lot better than where we were yesterday. All right, Jill, let's go to the next one. Whoops, I think I got one ahead of you, so sorry. Okay, the other real key piece to dialogue in common language is to talk about these 7 back office wastes. And I'm not going to talk through every single one of these, but it's defects, overproduction, transportation, waiting, inventory, motion, and processing. So defects and processing are probably the largest ones that are wastes in our back office processes. And so we really focus on trying to eliminate those wastes. But it's super critical with the team, if you can talk about these wastes and get people to understand them, identify them, right? And that's half the battle. So how do I identify it? What does it look like? And then describe it. How do you describe this? So that's one of the things when I work on processes with teams, we'll do what's called a waste walk, and we'll take a process and a small group, and we'll walk through it step by step and actually watch the people perform the work firsthand, and then categorize the waste that they're seeing into these 7 categories. And you'll see people write, and we do it on sticky notes. And now we've kind of transitioned to doing this virtually, but the number of defects and processing, people, they'll just be writing all sorts of waste that they see. So this, again, it starts to form this common language, and people, the power of having this in people's minds as they're going throughout their day, they'll see something that they're doing and they'll start talking about, yeah, well, that's over processing big time there, or this is a terrible amount of waiting that's happening on this. They start to see this. And so as managers, when our attention's called elsewhere, the team members that understand this, their brains are constantly seeing this when we're not maybe even paying attention to what's happening day in, day out. So that's kind of the power of distributing this knowledge down to the team level, is they really will dig into this and start to come up with ideas on how to eliminate these wastes. So again, work with people to identify them, describe them, and also try to quantify the waste that's there. So if it's, we've got too many defects, well, how many is that? Is it 5%? Is it, 1 of every 10? Work with our teams to quantify them. All right, so these are the 7 back office wastes that we work to eliminate out of our processes. All right, go ahead, Jill, go to the next one. All right, so now we're going to start to get into the how. And I'm going to talk about 2 methods for making improvements. And it mentions there, so these aren't your typical project-based improvement efforts. So I use 2 approaches that I think are really fabulous approaches to take and eliminate, to kind of look at your processes and try to eliminate the waste out of them. So the first method that I use with clients is event-based, or what I call rapid improvement events. So these, as I described there, they're rapid improvement events where you make measurable improvements with ideas and not necessarily any money. You're not necessarily implementing new software, because that's more project-based. It can take a lot of time, but it's really breaking down your process, writing it down, and then kind of starting from scratch. Take as much of the waste, that kind of low-hanging fruit waste out, rebuilding the process, putting it back together, and then having the process running with all the ideas and the waste removed. That's really what happens during these rapid improvement events. It's also a great training ground for people. So that's a great, as much as it is about process improvement, it's more about people improvement, because these rapid improvement events have every aspect that you need to experience in leadership. You got to prepare, and this is a very structured approach that we use in these rapid improvement events. We spend time really taking a look at the process and going through the tools, and then learning how to present in very concise ways to the supervisor. If it's whoever's leading, if the supervisor is leading it, they're going to present their findings on the process as they go through this process to their manager, and maybe the next level manager up, getting ready for the event. And then during the event, you got to manage a small team. So it's learning about how to manage personalities and conflicts that might come up, and then getting from where we need to be to the targets that are set. So in these improvement events, we have very clearly defined targets that are set, and they're also very challenging. So we take a look at improvement. We're typically heading out, shooting for a 30% improvement in things like processing time, a reduction of 50% maybe in the defects that are happening in a particular process. So very challenging goals that the teams go after. All right, so that's an event-based approach. And then we moved into daily improvement. Event-based, you just can't do them fast enough to make probably the overall gains that you need. They're really good at the beginning to kind of blow up processes and rebuild them. But at some point, you need to transition to more of a daily improvement approach. And so the structure that I'm going to show in the case study is just that. It's a way to go about this daily improvement, and to make it so that, again, you're not going through one change every 30, 60, 90 days, but you're trying to get to the point where everywhere in every workplace that you're responsible for, you have everybody involved and every day making some small incremental improvement. If you can get there, it's very, very powerful. So, but it's not an instant thing. So usually we start out with kind of teaching the concepts through rapid improvement events, and then we transition to daily improvement, and that helps sustain the changes and make sure we don't backslide. All right. Let's go on to the next one, Jill. Okay, so I talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to talk about the results. So I looked at the last 40 plus rapid improvement events that I was associated with. And again, I mentioned we take and make very specific goals for, how long does it take us to produce this, I'm going to say unsecured loan. It might be, on average, it's taken us 3 days. Well, if it's a $10,000 loan, that might be something that, hey, the customer expects it to have that same day. So whatever the process is, we're setting very aggressive goals for how we can shorten that time frame. We also take a look at our hands-on time, so what we call the processing time, and improvement, and taking errors out of or defects out of the process. So again, in the last 40 plus events that I've been associated with, these are the results we've achieved. So 59% on average reduction in the time that it takes to deliver. In none of these events did we implement any software. It was just things that we could actually do in a very short time frame. Almost a 50% reduction in hands-on processing time. Again, it's by breaking the process down, blowing it up, rebuilding it, and using the ideas of the people. These are small teams, 3 to 5 people on a team. Usually it's people with different perspectives of the process. It might be a branch person, it might be a compliance person, and then people who actually do the work and oversee the work in that area. And you can see there too is a over 50% improvement in errors. So it can be very, very powerful thing to do. Jill, let's go on to the next one. This kind of shows the timeline for these rapid improvement events. This is kind of a shock, I think, to a lot of people in the beginning when we start to do this, to say, well, how can I spend, 3 to 5 days, away from my job doing this? Well, everybody takes vacation and somehow you manage through that. So this is just a really very focused way to break your process down and improve it and move on. And so the goal of the event, and that's why there's so much prep work. Typically we spend about 4 weeks collecting data, and we do a lot of data collection to truly understand the process. We develop a charter. A lot of thought goes into developing a charter. And again, this is a great training ground for people on how to break problems down, how to describe it, communicate it out. So we spend a lot of time in this stage. And then the goal of the event is you come into it with the old process, you come out of it with the new process implemented and running. So this isn't a follow-up action item list project that goes on forever. This is 3 to 5 days, come in, break it down, put in the new process, measure it, make adjustments until we meet our targets. So everybody knows what we're trying to achieve. And again, we don't give up until we've got it done. So, and then we watch the process during that time frame, make sure it's working as intended. And then at the end, we'll do a final report out to leadership and their fellow team members, as well as putting in the structure on how to sustain it. So that is the rapid improvement event process. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the daily improvement approach. So this one starts off with, go ahead, Jill, hit the animation. Understanding the directions or the challenge. So what are we trying to do? So I'll use an example. Maybe it's we want to do this unsecured loan in same day. So that's the goal, right? That's what we want to do. That's the challenge. And it might take us a year or 2 or more to get there. But these are kind of the strategic items that the organization's trying to do that impacts this particular process. So that's the first thing, is how are we tied to what's strategic and what the goal is that we're trying to achieve. Go ahead and go to the next one, Jill. The second step is to understand the current condition. And this is probably the most important step. And we do this by going and seeing what's actually happening, where the work is actually being done. And there's, everything from capturing what are the volumes going through there to how the process is working. I'm going to show you an example of that. This is where a bulk of the work is done, is to really understand where we're at. Go ahead and go on to the next animation there. So the third step is to establish the next target condition. So we're not going to hit this challenge in one shot, but what's the next step? What's the nearest roadblock that's preventing us from getting to that challenge? So that's what we set as the next target condition. So what's achievable that we can do in a time frame of maybe days or weeks to get closer to that challenge. So it's removing one roadblock. And then we try and implement. So go ahead and go to the next one, Jill. That's the fourth step, is we experiment towards that target condition. And that might be one step, it might be 5 or 6 steps to get to achieve that next target condition. So we're breaking down that challenge into kind of bite-sized step chunks, and then we're methodically marching towards it. And we're really focused on getting from A to B in a straight line. We're not just randomly trying to eliminate waste. We're really trying to be strategic about how we're doing it, which ones impact that next target condition and limits our ability to get there. All right, so let's talk about the case study. Go ahead and go to the next one. Jill, thank you. Excuse me. So this is a case study of that daily improvement applied. And so this is what's called a daily improvement storyboard. And this particular board is focuses on loan boarding. So this is a consumer loan boarding area where a small team did, this client did consumer home equity lines of credit, but they did a lot of them. So this was a fairly big shop. And in order to get work flowing, they actually separated out their home equities from everything else in their consumer. So they didn't mix it with unsecured, they didn't mix it with other non-real estate secured loans. They had a team that just focused on home equity lines of credit, and they did anywhere from 250 to over 600 loans boarded in a given month. And so they went through the rapid 3-day improvement event, a process first, and really broke their process down. And during those 3 days, they were able to take 21% improvement in their processing time. They also had a 30-minute setup time in the morning, basically what I call it. So it took them 30 minutes just to figure out what they were going to do every day. And so then that's time not spent actually putting loans on the system. So they went in with a goal of trying to completely eliminate that setup time. And they didn't hit it entirely. They took 70% of it out. So they got it down to around 8-9 minutes. So that happened first. Then they went into this daily improvement structure coming out of the event. And the challenge that they put together, that first step that the leaders put in place with this, is the way the process worked is when a branch closed a loan, it would come in, hopefully, after closing, and then you had to wait 3 days for the right of rescission period to come up. So you couldn't put the loan on the system right away, or else you'd be in violation of reg for funding the loan before the right of rescission was up, which they struggled with because they had manual controls. So the loan would come in, they had to make sure they have everything, and then they had to wait until the 3rd day when they could actually board it. So that's 2 touches on it. So the leadership developed the goal to say, hey, we want a one-touch process for doing this. Why do we set it down, pick it back up again? Well, in order to do that, we're probably going to need some technology help, but that's all right. We're not going to worry about how we're going to get there. We don't know. We know that needs to be our goal. So that's what they said. And they also wanted a paperless process because it doesn't make any sense to have any paper in this process. So their challenge, go ahead and hit the animation, was right at the top of their storyboard. And it's that one-touch paperless process for pre-funding and booking was right there. All right, second step was to understand the current condition. Go ahead and hit the animation, Jill. That whole section of the board, and I had mentioned, that's where a lot of the efforts put, is understanding the current condition. So they had everything from the volumes coming through here. They knew that they needed to put a loan on the system about every 15 minutes in order to be on pace for the day. Based on their volumes, they might do 30 a day. So their volumes would adjust. This was one area where they were fortunate. They knew exactly coming into the day, because of that right of rescission delay, they knew exactly how many they were going to do every day. And so they could develop a plan on how to structure themselves on how to meet it. There's lots of process definition. There's process maps that they built that really define how the work is to be done. They use these as training guides. They'd analyze, how successful the work coming in was, right? How complete was it coming from the branches? They would measure that. They measured their overtime and tried to self-manage that because they didn't like to work overtime, even though they got paid extra. All of them had lives outside of work they wanted to do. So that they put it right up there. And this board made everything real. It made the vision real. It made the current condition real. And then the right side of the board, go ahead and hit the animation, Joe. That was their target condition. So that was the next step. So they weren't going to hit that, one-touch paperless process out of the gate. So they put together that next target condition. Where are we going to get to next? So that might be, putting in a control around how we're going to prevent, the 3-day right of rescission from happening based on a manual control. And then the rest of the board is what they use to track their that fourth step, the ideas to get towards the target condition. So all the experiments they ran, the problem solving that they did, were all captured there, as well as what I call the outcome metrics. So the speed at which they were able to put things through was measured here. You can see a little go sign at the bottom. That was an indicator to the management that they had reviewed the loans that were on the system the next day to make sure they were good and that they didn't violate the 3-day right of rescission rule. So that was, again, just kind of tried to make things very visual. So this is a loan case study, but I've used this approach with, help desk, call centers, digital digital account opening processes. This is a very powerful way to get to targets with just people's ideas, given the tools that you've got, right? It gets people engaged, it gets people's ideas moving, but it's also something that it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it takes some effort to put this into it. This is really, to me, is how you break out of that firefighting, because you're actually starting to chip away at problems and put them to rest for good. So then you don't end up having to kind of fight them again. All right. So this is the case study for boarding. Jill, go ahead and go to the next one. So I'm going to kind of start to wrap up here. So improvement starts by, the first step is studying the work. So this is a tool, time observation sheet. It's very fundamental. This is one of the first things that I do with teams is we study the process. So write it down. What are you seeing them doing step by step? And then watch the process again. What's happening? Did they follow the same sequence? Probably not. So you can record this. How you record it is kind of an art form. This is, again, the method that's taught on how to do this. But if you notice that your process isn't consistent, that's step one, right? Let's get everybody on the same page. Mary and Jane aren't doing the process the same. Let's come up with the best practice, document this process, and standardize it. And then how long should it take? And then if it doesn't take 10 minutes to do it, why didn't it take 10 minutes? That starts to form, the problems that we need to go after. So this is a very basic tool that kind of starts it by examining the work. And as you watch it, you start to see all the different things that don't happen as they should. So it's a very, very useful tool. And this is a very fundamental tool in the toolbox of continuous improvement. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so getting started. How do we get started? So if you really want to put together and kind of formalize continuous improvement, you want to identify what the support structure is going to be. I was fortunate enough in the bank I worked for, I actually started what we call the continuous improvement office. I've helped others set up continuous improvement offices, and sometimes that's an office of one person. Sometimes it's a shared responsibility of somebody who's a leader and has line responsibilities. But then we're also taking a look at an area that's strategically important for the bank or credit union, and also which resources, which people do we want to invest in that kind of have a natural ability that are very open to this type of an approach. So those are a couple critical first steps. Also looking at maybe a pilot area where we want to put this approach in. And then we train the folks and communicate, work through change management. So training people on the core principles as well as this improvement methodology approach. And I usually use two tools a lot in the beginning. Value stream mapping, which really helps map out the information flow that's going on in the process. And then the rapid improvement events that we talked about. I think that's a really good place to start just because it kind of teaches all of the tools and concepts in a very rapid way. And you also get to see improvements right now. You don't have to wait. I mean, we're making changes as we're learning and setting this structure up. But it all starts with leadership commitment. Let's go on to the last slide. So I want to wrap it up with just a couple final thoughts here from some folks that I like to read. Very wise continuous improvement folks. Amai was a master at rapid improvement events, and he said basically you can't do improvements just once or twice and expect immediate results. You have to be in it for the long haul. And then probably the most influential person in overall continuous improvement methodology, Taiichi Ohno from Toyota. His quote there is, when we study the way we work, there is an endless cycle of improvement. So he's right on the mark, but it takes that first step. We've got to study what the work is and work to eliminate the waste and just keep on doing it endlessly. All right, we're coming to the end here. That's all that I had to present. I told you it was going to be a lot in a short time frame. Jill, do we have any questions that came in?
I have one question. It looks like, are there any personality traits that tend to be more successful at doing this process?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, yes, and that's one of the things that fascinates me about the rapid improvement process specifically, is you really see people kind of blossom, especially folks that are quiet. So to me, humility is I don't know, I tend to gravitate towards that, because if you can just say, hey, this is a problem and I don't know how to solve it, but I'm going to own it and I'm going to go after it. So having that ability kind of to humble yourself, I think is a strong personality trait. And then those that are kind of relentless at going after it, you know, never really stop, or that can-do attitude, I think it's contagious. So when I go through rapid improvement events, these workshops, I'm always looking for people, because you'll watch, they become kind of the natural leaders. And so this is a great proving ground, or a kind of leadership grooming ground. But those would be the probably two traits I look for: humility and kind of that tenacity.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. Are there any other questions? Well, Tom and Jennifer, we cannot thank you enough for your time and expertise today. Thank you all to our bankers for joining the Service Corporation, and Jen and Tom from Cornerstone Advisors. We would love to connect you with them if you had any additional questions or thoughts that you'd like to discuss. As you all know, this is the first part of a 4-part series. So we would love to have you join for the next 3 Tuesdays with us. Also would love to buy you lunch. So please register next Tuesday, September 22nd at noon. is Finding Cost Savings with Benchmarks with John Meyer from Cornerstone Advisors. So again, thank you for your time today, and we appreciate you all. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.